Good morning, everybody, or afternoon, as we discussed, depending where you are. Thank you so much for joining us for the second week of Lessons and Legacies in Masechet Avot with Rabbi Yonatan Kohn. Oh, the third week. Oh, you're right. You're right, third week. I had to miss a couple because I was away for my brother's wedding, which is really exciting, but also
That's
had
awesome.
messes with my sense of time. So thank you. Yeah. Um, so yeah, sorry, third week. And being that it's the third week, we can jump right in. I'll just go through the reminders real quick, because you guys are all veterans. I'm going to be promoting people to panelists. That doesn't put any pressure on you, and it doesn't force anything. What it allows is for you to turn on your cameras so that we can see you, which is lovely, and you can raise your hands to ask questions. If you are watching on Facebook or if you're joining us at Zoom but prefer not to ask questions yourself, you're welcome to put them in the chat and on Zoom or the Facebook comments, and I'll happily pass this on to Rabbi Kohn when he says it's a good time for questions. And I'll also be putting the source sheet in those places in case anybody wants to follow along. And last week we just asked that you do stay muted when you're not speaking. And other than that, I think you guys should be pros at this. So I think we should be good. And if there's any issues, please let me know. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, everyone. And I'm going to actually not practice what I preach and turn off my camera because as you've experienced, my internet's a little unstable. But look forward to the class and thank you so much for joining us. Rabbi Kohn.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. I'm happy to learn with everyone again. Glad that it has worked out. I hope that you're doing well. So if we may jump right in to Parak Gimel. Of course, we're doing only little samples of every chapter. I'm trying to introduce a certain kind of a methodology, which I think is an absolutely necessary way to fully appreciate Masechet Avot. Before we begin the text today, I would say that two methodological points are in order, reminders of things that we've seen in the last couple of weeks. One is, again, my whole premise is that Masechet Avot is not named Ethics of the Fathers. With all respect for the many publications that assume that the word Avot refers to fathers, without saying that that's not true, my contention, and it's not originally mine, but my contention is that the concept Avot, the term Avot, refers to archetypes, as we have in several other instances and categories of halacha and usages within the language of the Chachamim, that the word avot refers to models or primary concepts from which are derived toladot, derivatives. And therefore, Masechet Avot is the study of big picture ideas. Not only the big picture ideas, but also, as we said, the evolution of concepts and the evolution of really a tradition. And that's why I look at Masechet Avot as being a story of lessons and legacies. Everybody teaches their own lessons, but tracing the lessons from one step to the next is really a story of legacies. And we'll see that again this week as well. The other point worthy of reminder to set the stage for our study today is that Masechet, we have seen that we'll hold off on the second comment and we'll come back to it as we go. Just to remind ourselves again, last week we learned about Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai and his relationship with his students, his 5 students, and we saw that even though Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was the master of the tradition, he described himself as having mastered the word on the street was that he had completely mastered every aspect of the Torah tradition, the written Torah, the oral Torah, and in addition, he had all these other bodies of knowledge whose identities are a little bit obscure. Talked about the parables of the foxes and the parables of the laundry people, the launderers, whatever exactly that means. Again, very unclear. And yet, and he had mastered it all. And we also described his incredible study habits. He was the first one in the Beit Midrash and the last one to leave. And yet, when it comes time for him to speak, the Mishnah says he opened up the books in front of his 5 students, or I'm sorry, doesn't even say he opened up the books. He said to his 5 students, "Go and you tell me what the lesson is." So Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai is taking his great tradition, but he says ultimately it's more important that you take your skills as students and implement the skills as best as you can to tell me what you can find. And that's teaching. His teaching is not only giving the students, I would say not at all, giving the students a text to repeat, but giving them the tools to discover something for themselves. But that's a very quick recap of what we did last week. Let's move on to this week's lesson. So the other point that I wanted to say before is that each chapter in Masechet Avot, as we've seen, arguably, or you can see it as revolving around a certain theme or having certainly certain strings that tie everything together. It's pretty easy to follow the orientation or the organization of the first chapter because it involves a chronological sequence, a movement from one era to the next. The era first of Moshe Rabbeinu, and then quickly we zip through to the Knesset HaGdolah, and the Anshe Knesset HaGdolah, the members of the Great Assembly, and then each pair of Mishnayot jumps another era to the leaders of the next, we'll call it generation, without giving specific numbers of specific amount of years. And that's clearly how the first chapter unfolds. Last week, we emphasized that the theme of the organization of the second chapter is not rigidly continuing that same timeline. However, the Mishnayot do revolve around a certain theme, in particular, as we said, the theme of raising the students, but more specifically, the idea that a person has to think, that your decisions are functions of the questions that you ask, and a person has to pause. What you'll get is a function of what you're looking for. Okay, so the third chapter is a little bit harder because here all the senses of chronology are completely thrown out the window. And as opposed to the first 2 chapters in which we had a clear designation, here was the teacher and here was the student, at least in several Mishnayot. In the third chapter, we don't have any of that at all. We don't have the word kibel. We don't know who learned from anyone. And we just have these names. I will point out again, as we said in the first week with regards to Hillel, whose Mishnayot, one of them was spoken in Babylonian, and we'll come back to that one, God willing, next week in the 4th chapter. But Hillel's teachings, the way that they're presented to us, have a certain music to them, a certain kind of a sound. And that, we said, is not unique to Masechet Avot. The Mishnah in general is a text which was designed, edited in a way that was supposed to be efficiently memorized and easy to organize in one's head. Even to this day, there are many places where they teach the children to memorize Mishnayot, and certainly the language is amenable to that in many places. Won't go into that any further right now, but if you want to ask me about that on the side, I'm happy to elaborate a little bit. But in our parak in particular, if you read through the first 7, 8, 9 Mishnayot, you'll notice that there's a lot of chan, chas, that many of the names, thank you for the chat. So I'm reminded now to open my, I will share my own screen. But without reading all the Mishnayot inside, as we said, unfortunately, we don't have time to read all the Mishnayot together. I would say, can everyone see my source sheet? Yeah? Okay. So I would say that if you take out your own text or look up online of the 3rd chapter of Masechet Avot, again, interest of not wasting everyone's time with scrolling, you'll notice a lot of the names are Chanina, Chachinai, and names like that. So clearly, that should be something that we notice. It doesn't seem to be an accident. So there is a kind of a connection between the names that maybe makes it easier. Okay, I'm gonna there's a certain section in Chicago when we were growing up. You would drive west out of the city and into the suburbs, and there's an area where there's like 10 or 12 streets in a row, and all of the streets begin with the letter K. Now, how you organize in your head, knowing which street is it Colmar first, or I don't know how you're supposed to remember within those which comes first, but this is the K section. I'm not sure again if it's so helpful in that instance, but over here you have the Chaninas and the Chachinais, and the truth is, when you look at the other texts that we've mentioned in the past, the alternative versions of Masechet Avot, specifically Avot Rabbi Natan, you will see that with regards to some of these teachings, it's not entirely clear who the speaker was. Was it Chanina? Was it Chananya? Was it Chachinai? And that obviously is a little bit of a pitfall of the way that things are organized. I would like to think that there's more to the theme than just having a similar sound, and that we see as well. So let's jump right into to today's lesson. So in Mishnah Tet, we are introduced to Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa, except we're not really introduced to him. We just have his teaching. What do we know? Does anyone remember anything about Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa? What's he most associated with? So Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa is known as a miracle worker. Many stories in the Gemara about all of the incredible things that happened to him. He had an enormous amount of faith, and Hashem rewarded him. Maybe I shouldn't use the word rewarded. We'll hold that maybe to the fifth week. But Hashem bestowed upon him many miracles because of his special relationship with Hashem. There is another story which is also famous. Sorry, 1 second. No, we'll hold off on that one. Yeah, Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa, in addition to being known as a great miracle worker, was also exceptional. Again, evidently there's a close relationship. Was exceptionally successful in his prayers, and people would go to him to ask him specifically to pray for the ill to recover, and that was Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa's special merit, is that he was able to, his tefillot were answered where others were not. Okay, let's take a look at what he has to say. Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa, I'll also mention, was a contemporary of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, meaning to say that he was a first-generation Tana. So here again, you see the chronology that we had set up until now has now started to disintegrate a little bit, and it's more about the ideas rather than the timing. So he says the following: Kol shirat chet'o kodemet l'chochmato, chochmato mitkayemet. Kol shechochmato kodemet yirat chet'o, ein chochmato mitkayemet. Okay, I hesitate, but we'll read the English. I hesitate, and I hope someone will maybe help me. Will help to identify why I hesitate a little bit. There are a couple terms in here which maybe require very careful translation, but we'll read the translation that I got from Sefaria. Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa said, anyone whose fear of sin precedes his wisdom is enduring. But anyone whose wisdom precedes his fear of sin, his wisdom is not enduring. Okay? There's nice symmetry in the Mishnah, and the second sentence would seem to be a proper response to the first one, and a good mirror image. Before we move on, what terms could we maybe probe a little bit further? Precede, excellent, okay. That's an equivalent to which term in the Mishnah? What's the Hebrew?
Kodemet. Kodemet.
Kodemet. Okay. So do you have an alternative suggestion for what the word kodemet might mean in English? How we might say that in English?
Is greater?
Okay, I'm glad you said greater. Let's hold off on that word, but that's definitely
has greater weight.
Greater weight. Okay. Is there a reason that we should maybe hesitate to say precedes?
Because precedes sounds like it's something with in time.
Excellent. Okay. But okay, so why does that tell us that we should pause?
Because that's
why would that not be correct?
That doesn't seem to be the intent of Rav Chanina ben Dosa.
Okay. So that's one term. Maybe we'll actually highlight it. This word kodemet needs to be a little bit sharpened. What else? Any other term here that maybe is a little bit? I'll give you 1.5.
Chachmato.
Okay, that's not the word I was looking for, but definitely that does require translation. Wisdom. What kind of wisdom specifically are we referring to? Are we referring to a specific kind of wisdom? We'll see as we go on that's an important question as well. How about this word over here? It's got to be translated. I have a lot of sympathy. I work in translation many hours every day, so I have a lot of sympathy for someone who has to render this into English. But really, the word enduring is not simply a translation. It is definitely an interpretation. Why? Where else do we have this term? What other connotation does this Hebrew term have sometimes in English? In other, say, halachic contexts, Mishnaic contexts?
Prevail or exist.
Okay, exist and endure are similar but not the same. So I'll take exist.
The word kiyum is used in the phrase kiyum mitzvot.
In effect.
Kiyum mitzvot, right? Kiyum mitzvot is fulfillment.
In effect.
Okay, for something to take effect, for something to be fulfilled. And if you read the Mishnah that way, if that's what Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa is saying, then we have a totally different implication, a totally different lesson over here. So let's take it one step at a time. Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa tells us if a person's fear of sin, now the word kodemet here again was translated as precedes, but as Debbie pointed out, we have to be wary about maybe identifying that as chronological. And why is that? So I'm glad here Debbie jumped right to the point. Again, Debbie does not get royalties from me. I don't know what's happening in Drisha behind the scenes. But the Rashbatz, who's the commentary that we've mentioned already a few times in our study, he points out that we have already learned in the second parak, again, the things that we can't see everything inside and because of the limits of time. But he's already pointed out, Ein bur yirechet, somebody who was a bur, which of course is the same in Hebrew as it is in English, basically. Someone who doesn't know anything, an ignoramus, cannot be fearful of sin. So how is it possible for your fear of sin to come before your wisdom? Because you don't know what sin is. Your fear of what sin? So he says, really, the word kodemet can't mean strictly chronologically. It has to mean ontologically. You might say that there's a great word in English, which is related. Again, there's a little bit of the ambiguity in English that there is in Hebrew. We would say whatever has priority. So if somebody's fear of sin has priority over their wisdom, then their wisdom is mitkayemet. That's Rashbatz's suggestion. Here we're not talking about proceeding chronologically, but we're talking about a certain priority in terms of an ontological priority. What has a higher place in the pecking order? And therefore we can talk about a wisdom that is mitkayemet if yirat chet comes first. Now, what should that have to do with something enduring? How does that work? That my wisdom does not endure.
It won't last.
It won't last.
It's
It
not
won't
on
last.
it's not on a good foundation.
Okay, nice. The wisdom is not on a good foundation, and therefore it'll slide away. I really like the usage of the word foundation. We'll have some minutes for what this might look like, how we could illustrate it. However, there's another possibility, like I said, and that is that the chokhmah is not mitkayemet. It could be Rabbi Chanina Mendoza saying it is not fulfilled. In other words, the wisdom, there are two kinds of wisdom. There's wisdom that's purely theoretical, and then there's wisdom which is practical. If you like science, I know that some people in the crowd like science. Talk about potential energy and kinetic energy. Okay, that chokhmah, which is not placed in its proper relationship with yirat chet, is merely potential. But in order for it to be kinetic, in order for it to be actualized, the chokhmah has to have its proper relationship with the yirat chet. Okay, let's move on. Hu haya omer, and we're not done with this, but we're moving on. Hu haya omer kol shema'asav mirubin mechokhmato, chokhmato mitkayemet. Kol shechokhmato miruba mima'asav, ein chokhmato mitkayemet. So again, very nice symmetrical statements. He also used to say, anyone whose deeds exceed his wisdom is enduring, or is fulfilled. But anyone whose wisdom exceeds his deeds, his wisdom is not enduring, or his wisdom is not fulfilled. So that's why I said before, I'm sorry I didn't catch who had said the word aloud, but when we were talking about kodemet, someone said the word something like abundant or more, and here Rabbi Chanina Mendoza explicitly mentions more, but not in terms of yirat chet, but rather in terms of ma'asim. If we can zoom out for just a moment, yirat chet in thought we would normally associate with, I mean, it's pretty explicit. We have the verse in Mishlei, Sur Meira Va'asei Tov. This is kind of, in many respects, in many books in the Jewish literature, we talk about two relationships, practically speaking, two relationships with God. The relationship of Aveira and the relationship of Mitzvah. That's obviously a great oversimplification. But, there's always yin and yang, there's give and take. So yirat chet is the things that we stay away from, and that's the negative aspect. That's the mitzvot lo ta'aseh. So what can you talk about in mitzvot lo ta'aseh? Like we said, stay away from them. In that case, we have to talk about yirah. Yirah is the word that he uses to describe avoiding. You have to have an attitude that encourages avoiding chet. What about the positive aspects of Judaism, the mitzvot aseh? So Rabbi Chanina Mendoza, again, in a beautiful symmetry, he says, not only is it enough to stay away from sin, we have to talk about a person's attitude towards actively doing mitzvot. Staying away from sin is good when you're talking about chametz on Pesach. When you're talking about a lulav on Sukkot, you're not talking about staying away from something, you're not talking about sin, you're talking about actively doing a mitzvah. So here he uses the word ma'asim. Of course, ma'asim refers definitely to the positive mitzvot, but it may or may not also refer to bein adam l'chaveiro. I would say it's perhaps alluded to, but not explicitly. In any case, you definitely have, like I said, the two aspects of the relationship with God, and both of them are pitted with the chokhmah. Now, what lurks behind all of this, of course, is that Rabbi Chanina Mendoza is addressing a very specific kind of person, someone with a real straight agenda, a clear agenda. Who is the who? Let's not ask it as a who. What is the value, or the, let's say, goal? What is the goal of the person whom Rabbi Hanina Mendoza is addressing? I'll ask it a little bit sharper. The person that Rabbi Hanina Mendoza is speaking to cares mostly about what? It's a one-word answer.
Chachma.
Chachma. Chachma. Now, chokhmah is the word which appears in the Mishnah 4 times. Okay? 8 times. Chokhmato. What's kodem l'chokhmato? Chokhmato mitkayemet. Chokhmato, kol shechokhmato kodem li'atchato, ein chokhmato mitkayemet. So the word chokhmah is repeated over and over and over again. And the great irony, of course, is if you really care about chokhmah, which he says 4 times, right? Here's your chance for it to endure. Here's your chance for it not to endure or for it to be fulfilled. If you really care about it, what does he say? Put it in the back seat. You really care about it? Something else has to outweigh it or has to have greater priority. And this is shocking, right? From a logical perspective, it would almost be, you ask a 3-year-old to make an argument, you want something, so you take all of that, you take more of that. But the way to take care of your chokhmah, apparently, if you really care about chokhmah, then you'll make something else a higher priority, or perhaps chronologically first, as other Rishonim explain, which we leave on the side for now. But clearly the chokhmah, even though that's a person's end goal, has to be, like I said, has to take the back seat. And that's both with respect to avoiding sin and also with respect to positive actions. Okay.
So there have to be.
Is it possible that what Rabbi Dosa is saying is that just to go after wisdom for its own end is not the most desirable way to approach Judaism?
Okay, good. So now tell me what the word mitkayemet means.
It means that the knowledge that you have is only fulfilled when it leads to Yirat Shamayim or Avat Ben Adam. And how do you show Avat Ben Adam? By doing the mitzvot.
Okay, so you answered and even more, right? That the word is fulfilled, really. And I think it's almost a universal translation that you'll find in almost all the Mishnayot, and people teach it that way, and not just they teach it that way. I think people really read it that way. And there are other Mishnayot actually in Masechet Avot which indicate that seem to be using the word mitkayemet in terms of having a long-term endurance, well, which we may or may not speak about in a couple of weeks. Unfortunately, I'm not sure we'll speak about that. Maybe we will. But here mitkayemet fits beautifully. If we understand it that way, that the idea of chachma in Judaism is a chachma which cannot merely be potential energy; it has to be kinetic energy.
Good.
Okay. This is Rabbi Hanina Mendoza, and again, really, if you from your knee-jerk reaction, Rabbi Hanina Mendoza says is really quite a chidush. It's quite surprising. If the person wants chokhmah, I mean, imagine somebody who's searching for knowledge and they come into the university, lahavdil, but they come to the wise man, and the wise man says, "Okay, you want to be wise, you want your wisdom to be mitkayem, then first let's talk about your fear of sin." What? Right? So that's already a chidush, and we'll move on to Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah. Debbie, have another comment or question?
How are we interpreting chachma? Are we interpreting it as knowledge or as knowledge of God?
Thank you. Good. Hold on a moment. Okay. I'm glad you asked that question. Let's see. let's move on to the next Mishnah, which will address the question in part.
Can I say one thing?
Yes.
I enjoyed when you pointed out that the idea of that Chachma comes up again and again, and yet there's something before that. And I wanted to piggyback on what the preceding speaker had said, that if it's the only way that knowledge has value is if we put values preceding it. It's not, there's no such thing as objective knowledge. You can't go and say, I want to learn and just have knowledge for the sake of knowledge. You have to first come in and have your own values before you try to take in knowledge. It's like saying atomic atoms are good or atomic power is good. You first have to have a knowledge and then decide how to use the atomic power. Otherwise, it can be for good or bad.
Thank you. Excellent. Let's hold on. The question, the comment stands on its own. I'm not going to. That's beautifully stated. And I'll just add another word here. I'll add another word to enrich the point. I believe. I hope it enriches the point, but I'm not going to speak in your name. Which is that when a person comes into study, they always have a certain two words. They come with their axioms, or they come with their biases. Okay, and oftentimes these things are completely unconscious, but they're everything that they see will be interpreted through the lenses that they're wearing, right? So the priority or the precedent, again, I'm using words that definitely relate to the word kodemet, is non-negotiable here, right? Did you have another comment, Professor Nader?
You're doing good. You're doing well.
Okay, let's move on. Please notice that first we saw Mishnah Tet. Now we're going to take a look at Mishnah Yud Zayin, which I know doesn't come immediately after, but as we've seen, these two Mishnayot are definitely speaking to each other. And this Mishnah is spoken by Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Now we know who Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is. He was the great Rosh Yeshiva who was appointed as a teenager. There's a story in the Haggadah of Pesach that's about him. Harei ani kiven shivim shana. And he was 16 or 17 or 18, depending on which tradition you're following exactly. And he had enormous authority. And he's the speaker in this Mishnah. He is a third generation Tana. So we're going already 2 generations ahead in the tradition, in this tradition. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Omer, Im ein Torah, ein derech eretz. Im ein derech eretz, ein Torah. Im ein chokhmah, ein yirah. Im ein bina, im ein yirah, ein chokhmah. Im ein bina, ein da'at. Im ein da'at, ein bina. Im ein kemach, ein Torah. Im ein Torah, ein kemach. Okay. Now again, beautiful, perfect symmetry. What is very challenging? Oh, let's translate the terms first. Sorry. Where there is no Torah, there is no derech eretz. I cannot touch that one at all. I'm really sorry. Derech eretz is a term given to so many different interpretations and so many different suggestions, sometimes specific, sometimes general. I have to say, we just have to leave aside what derech eretz is, other than to saying the way of the world, which is literally what it means, the way of the world. Without Torah, there's no way of the world, and without the way of the world, there is no Torah. If there is, where there is no wisdom, there is no fear. Where there is no fear, there is no wisdom. Where there is no understanding, there is no knowledge. Where there is no knowledge, there is no understanding. Where there is no bread, there is no Torah. Where there is no Torah, there is no bread. Okay. As opposed to, yes.
Can I make one comment? When you talk about derech eretz, and I know that you don't want to go into it, I think in this particular context, it's a positive midah. It's talking about correct. That's the way the Sifriya also translates it. So derech eretz here is not only the way of the world, but it's the way of the world in a positive sense.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I'll accept it. I'll accept it. Again, there may be other connotations, maybe specific connotations, but I want to throw out there concretely that the word derech eretz is a somewhat amorphous term, which is used with diverse meanings within rabbinic literature also. Sometimes it leans very strongly that they mean one specific thing, and in other places it really does not. It sounds like it means something else. So I'm just going to leave it for now. But I have no problem. I have no problem with saying right conduct. That's not incorrect. Okay.
Is derech eretz ever used in the negative context?
No. No. As opposed to Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa, however, and here it's very, very hard to say that one thing has priority over another. He has all of these combinations of things, and we can only speculate. In other words, before it was all about how I get my chokhmah. Well, your chokhmah has to take a back seat. Here, it's extremely unclear which one has to take the front seat, which one has to take the back seat. And I would say it's not just unclear because he didn't spell it out. It might be unclear because there might not be a hard and fast rule. In other words, there's nothing about proportions at all. So sometimes you need maybe even 95% of this and 5% of that. But it's so critical that you have both. And in fact, maybe the different combinations really depend on time and space and the individual circumstances. Getting back to Debbie's point from before, however, I would like to point out that we have a few words here which we might not have noticed as definitely being independent of each other. And specifically, we have Chokhmah listed and we have Torah listed. So again, at the caution of not reading too much Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah into Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa. In other words, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah speaks for himself, but I'm not sure that what Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa meant when he said, Chokhmato mitkayemet. Was he talking specifically about the Jewish knowledge, which we can call Torah, the Jewish spiritual knowledge, or he was talking about knowledge in general? Because here, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah evidently distinguishes between these two terms. There's no reason to say that Chokhmah is a bad thing. However, Chokhmah might be, and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, might be something wider than merely Torah. So, and we'll see that, we'll see, you know what, let's jump ahead for just a moment so I can sharpen my point. I was really happy to find this Braita in Avot Rabbi Natan, which we said, again, is an alternative version of Pirkei Avot. This is not Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, but it is on the word Chokhmah. So Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa's teaching is presented there as well. And again, so we don't we're not too redundant. I blocked here in bold the only difference between Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa's text and, the Mishnah's text and Avot Rabbi Natan. We have the same teaching of Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa, so the teaching is confirmed. I'm glad to see it's confirmed. But then he throws in Avot Rabbi Natan, the Braita throws in this extra proof text, which I think is the key to the whole thing. Why is it, or what is the anchor that teaches me that whether a person's chokhmah is kayemet, mitkayemet or not? So he says the proof text for the whole thing, if a person's yirat chet is not preceded or doesn't have as its priority, the fear of sin, that's what the verse says, Reshit chokhmah yirat Hashem. When you're talking about wisdom, the beginning of wisdom is the fear of God. Okay? So therefore, again, Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa it's the same teaching, but now I have it a little bit more anchored. This is already a pasuk in Tehillim. The pasuk is telling me, in fact, and I want to come back to Debbie's illustration, there's a lot of wisdom. There's a lot of good wisdom. And in fact, I don't have to say a bracha in the morning. Again, within the Jewish tradition, I don't have to say a bracha in the morning before I sit down to do my physics problem, before I start to do my nuclear physics problem. Okay? And I for sure wouldn't make a bracha because I wouldn't make a bracha on something I'm going to do wrong. And don't send me to do your physics work. But the wisdom that's worth something, Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa says, he's not saying that it's not called wisdom, but if you want a wisdom which is going to be mitkayemet, it's going to be fulfilled, then it has to be preceded by the fear of God. And in fact, this evokes the whole exchange. Again, we could do this for hours, but the exchange between Yitzchak and Avimelech, where Avimelech says to Yitzchak in Sefer Breshit, why did you lie to me about your wife? And you claimed that she's your sister. And Yitzchak says, Rak ein yirat Elokim b'makom hazeh. I saw that there's no fear of God here. And if there's no fear of God here, then, straight information, giving you the story as it is not safe. It's not safe enough. So I couldn't talk to you straight. But leaving aside, which we shouldn't leave aside, but for now we have to leave aside the ethical issues of how to lie and when to lie, and but that's, in other words, there's nothing to talk about between me and you if I can't trust you that you have the most simple, decent fear of God. So when I tell you that somebody's nice, yes.
I think that Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa called it Yirat Ched, and here we're calling it Yirat Hashem. Are we saying they're the same thing?
Thank you. I'm really glad you made that point. I'm making an assumption. I'm making an assumption which is a challengeable assumption. Yirat Chet is not necessarily merely the fear of God, or I should say it the other way around. The fear of God is not merely the fear of sin. That's true, but I would say that in the concentric circles, there's a great degree of overlap between them. And for our purposes, a great expression of fear of God is the fear of sin. Okay? So I would say largesse, right? And as a generality, these two do coincide. They're not identical, but they coincide. Okay. Let's go a little further. Here, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is going to comment directly on the tradition from Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa, which preceded him by 2 generations. Hu haya omer, kol shechochmato miruba mima'asav. Okay, that's all I need to know, to see. It's all I need to see to know, wait a second, this Mishnah is not operating in a vacuum. He is relating to that tradition that I learned just before. Lema hu domeh, le'ilan she'anafav merubin, v'shorashav mu'atin, v'haruach ba'a v'okarto v'hofachto al panav, shene'emar v'haya ke'ar'ar ba'arava, v'lo yireh ki avot tov, v'shachein charirin ba'midbar, eretz melecha v'lo teshev. Please excuse me that I took out the nekudot here from this text this time, just because I thought it crowded the page a little bit too much. But I think I pronounced the words basically correctly. He used to say, one whose wisdom exceeds his deeds, okay? And Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa told us how important it is that when you have a little bit of Torah, it has to be weighted down by your deeds. It has to be outweighed by the deeds. And that way the Torah is mitkayemet. That he didn't show us, he didn't illustrate for us what that means exactly. So Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, I have an illustration. What is that person comparable to? To a tree whose branches are numerous. And here the branches correspond to what? In the mashal? What's numerous? Well, we'll see. Right?
Chachma.
So, someone whose wisdom exceeds his deeds, the branches are the wisdom, the chachma. So he's got a lot of chachma, which is, right? Chachma is good. I just, I want to learn and learn and learn. I want to be the wisest in the land. But whose roots are few. So that when the wind comes, it uproots it and overturns it onto its face. As it is said, he shall be like a bush in the desert, which does not sense the coming of good. It is set in the scorched places of the wilderness in a barren land without inhabitant.
Rabbi Khan, why is this brought? We seem to always to have before been comparing, or not comparing, but discussing Chachma versus Yira, and here Yira is not mentioned at all.
No,
Here it's
because
Chachma
here
and
he's talking,
Matim.
thank you, because he's talking about the second teaching of Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa, right? We
That's
said
so.
there were two teachings. There was Yirat Chet, which has to have priority, and then we said there's Ma'asim, which have to be Mirubim, they have to be more numerous. How can a person have more deeds than wisdom? Means that every bit of wisdom has to be weighted down very, very heavily. So, for instance, in one little illustration, I know the mitzvah of tzitzit. That's the only mitzvah I know. So don't start to talk to me about kashrut. I can't do kashrut, can't do tefillin, but I know the mitzvah of tzitzit. I know it once, I will do it 10 times. Okay, so then I have many ma'asim just from one piece of chokhmah. And that way the chokhmah is mitkayamet. But here again, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is illustrating, and I would say really in a stark and disturbing fashion even. Because chokhmah, again, if I just say to you, and if we're not in a religious setting, okay, and then we come to a Jew who's not religiously affiliated, and we ask if the Jews have a, not someone who doesn't know, someone who's educated, but not religiously educated, not religiously affiliated. Say, are the Jews a wise people? So the person would quite possibly say, oh, the Jews have a lot of wisdom. Okay, the Jews are people of wisdom. Certainly, if there are many non-Jews who the stereotypical picture of a Jew, there's a lot of art that reflects that. There's a Jew with his book. Okay, the Jews are a people of wisdom. So wisdom in and of itself sounds good. But the wisdom is heavy branches, right? And that's not the roots. The branches, and let's put it this way. It's not only that the branches are unhelpful, that they're not mitkayemet. The branches are actually the tools to the tree's destruction. The branches bring about, because it's top heavy. It's so imbalanced that it's destructive. It's waiting for disaster. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah has given us this stark, but really consistent, and it's based in a pasuk, a stark vision of how bad it is to have the relationship between deeds and wisdom off. But there's one even more shocking element of this illustration, which is, of course, is that how does a tree grow? Grows from its roots. Well, how do I know what to do? Right? The chokhmah, how do I know what to do without branches? How can I have roots without branches? It seems like a little bit of a paradox, right? You're growing a lot of, remember, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah already told us, I'm addressing someone who wants wisdom. You want your wisdom. You want the branches. And the branches are the ones that inform my deeds, but yet I have to have more deeds. Yes.
So, as a scientist, I'm a little bit bothered by your saying that the branches are ultimately a source of the destruction of the tree.
Good. Okay, yeah.
I would rather suggest humbly that maybe if you go back to the saying of Elazar ben Azariah and you look at the whole thing, one word comes out, and that is symbiosis. That he's telling you that in all of these things, in order to be successful or to get where we would like to get, we need to have a symbiotic relationship. And that's why Ein Torah, Ein Derech Eretz. About Ein Derech Eretz, Ein Torah. We need both sides. That's a symbiotic relationship.
Thank you for the correction. But I don't think I'm disputing that. In other words, it's true that the branches are not the cause of the trouble, but it's the disproportion. You say symbiosis. How about homeostasis? One scientific term deserves another, right? The homeostasis, which refers to the proper balance of the ecosystem, whatever it is, right? Of the different relationship between the parts of the organism. So the branches are not bad, but the imbalance ultimately uses the branches as the tool of destruction. That's the point. Not because the branches are inherently bad. And if I implied that, then it was misleading. But maybe I'm trying to pull that out. Once you have an imbalance, now again, it wouldn't. Let's even put it this way, which is stark, and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is not telling you to do this, but really a solution. You take a certain kind of person out to this desert, and you say, "Here, I've got this crazy tree. I don't know how it happened, but it's got a lot of branches and only a few roots. What do we do?" So the simplest, quick solution is cut off some branches, right, to restore the proper center of balance. I say that, yeah.
At the same time, if you had no branches, the tree would die.
Okay, good. So that's untenable to cut off the branches, and in terms of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, but that's the point. Is it's so important to have the roots. It's so important to have the roots. Okay, we'll finish the mashal over here, the other side. Aval, he says, by contrast, kol shema'asav mirubin mechochmato lemahu domeh le'ilan she'anafav mu'atin v'sharashav mirubin she'afilu kol haruchot sheba'olam ba'ot v'noshvot bo ein mizizin oto mimkomo shene'emar v'haya ke'etz shatul al mayim ve'al yuval yishlach sharashav v'lo yireh ki yavo chom v'haya aleyu ra'anan v'shnat batzoret lo yid'ag v'lo yamish me'asot peri. But one whose deeds exceed his wisdom, and again, that's the proper proportion according to Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa's teaching. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah tells us what is the illustration there? To what may he be compared? To a tree whose branches are few, but roots are many. Meaning to say, even with only a minimal amount of chokhmah, the tree is still going to be very healthy. So that even if all the winds in the world come and blow upon it, they cannot move it out of its place. As it is said, he shall be like a tree planted by waters, sending forth its roots by a stream, does not sense the coming of heat, its leaves are ever fresh, has no care in a year of drought, it does not cease to yield fruit. Okay. I have a little bit of attention over here because on the one hand, I would like to summarize. But on the other hand, I would really, really like to add one more illustration over here.
Excuse me, but according to that
Yes.
mashal, learning for learning's sake is looked down upon.
Oh, wow. Okay. I'm going to ask you to hold on to this question, and we will. Okay. That's a great cliffhanger. Okay. That's a great cliffhanger. What about learning for learning's sake? I owe you that answer for next week. We will incorporate that into next week, which is perfect because it is one of the themes that comes up in the 4th chapter. Okay, learning for learning's sake. Excellent. Okay, if I just may, again, Avot Rabbi Natan has, you know what? I think you have the handouts that were sent to you, so I'll encourage you to take a look at it yourself. I believe, again, it was emailed to you. Otherwise, you could take a screenshot now of what I have on the screen in front of you. But there's another illustration, and to me, it's always fruitful to try to compare or consider what exactly, and we'll do it with Nechama Leibowitz style. I'll leave you with the question, and you write your answer. What one mashal highlights rather than the other. we'll do a quick 2-minute summary. So we have seen here, both in Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa and in Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, that in fact there are multiple. A person needs to have a certain amount of balance. Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa was talking about a person striving for wisdom. And his chidush, again, chidush is a teaching that I wouldn't have thought of on my own. I wouldn't have expected, wouldn't have formulated necessarily just from my own thoughts. The chidush is, if I really care about wisdom, I can't only go for wisdom. The wisdom has to be anchored in some way. And he says there are two things that anchor the wisdom. There has to be a fear of sin. A fear of sin has to have priority to my wisdom. And priority could mean that it comes first, or it could mean priority in the sense of my ontological values, that wisdom does not supersede, doesn't dictate more than my fear of sin does. That's his first teaching. On the other hand, we have another relationship with God, which is an active relationship. We have the things that we are required to do, and it's not just with God. Ma'asim, as we said, also has a connotation, though it's not explicit, but has a connotation of how I behave with other people. And my wisdom is also, it fails in some way. It fails if it does not express itself in my actions, in my positive actions. That was the first layer, the first generation. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, a couple generations later, showed us he illustrated that there are many other things that need to have some sort of a balance. And again, balance does not always mean 50-50, but balance means the two things that play off of each other. And there are many such things that talk to each other, including, as he said, using Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa's language, yirah and chokhmah. That the chokhmah, that if there's no yirah, there's no chokhmah. But also, if there's no chokhmah, there's no yirah, which we didn't address very much now, but very, very briefly we mentioned that it's impossible to fear sin if you don't know what sin is. So you have to have some wisdom even to propel your wisdom. Some wisdom even to propel your fear of sin, to identify what sin is. And finally, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah gave us an illustration. He said that if a person, that a great deal of wisdom without proper anchoring and an imbalanced homeostasis within the organism could be disastrous. But if a person's wisdom, which is their branches, are properly anchored with their wisdom, with their deeds, properly anchored with the person's deeds, then the whole tree will blossom and flourish even under the trying circumstances. Okay, we're out of time. I'm happy indirectly to receive any more follow-up questions or feedback. And God willing, we'll meet again, same bat time, same bat channel next week to talk about also, besides the fourth chapter, one theme of the fourth chapter in particular, the idea of Torah lishma, Torah for his own sake.
Thank you so much, Kol Tuv.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Kohn, and thank you to everyone who joined us. Very quickly before we end, first of all, see you again next week, as Rabbi Kohn said. And please go to drisha.org, which is our fabulously newly revamped website, where you can see all the really wonderful Spira classes that we have going on now, which I really, if you haven't checked them out, you can join them at any point, or you can catch up from our extensive recording library, which is really wonderful. So please, really not too late to join those. And also, the deadline is coming up for enrolling in Drisha Summer Kollel, which will be online this year. We'll be learning Gemara in the morning with Rabbi Dan Margulies, who's I've heard is really wonderful, and I'm excited to learn with him. And in the afternoon, we'll be learning variety of speakers, a variety of topics. So really exciting stuff. Please go check that out, and looking forward to seeing you all next week. Thank you so much again. Have a good
Thank
week.
you.